Why Jim Fabio? Why now? Jim sits at a rare intersection. Combat veteran, Emmy-winning storyteller, Mensa-level intellect, and a small agency operator in an era of consolidation and AI disruption. He's not just an observant that transforms visual storytelling, but he's documented war zones, produced content for Oprah, captured the Olympics, and has completed a documentary about the civil rights massacre that America has deliberately forgotten. This is an individual who has witnessed the machinery of truth from inside the military-industrial complex and also the entertainment industry. He's been present at the moments where the camera itself becomes both a moral decision and a moral compass. Jim's entire career has been about the tension between what is seen and what is real, between the chaos of combat and the structured narrative of documentaries, between the ephemeral nature of sport and the permanence of film, between forgotten massacres and deliberate silence. He doesn't perform, he transmits signals of clarity. Emmy-winning filmmaker, retired Air Force colonel, founder of True Blue Creative. Jim, it's fucking great to have you on the show.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it.
Let's dive in. I want to ask you a signature 3-part question. Tackle it any way you want. Jim, who are you? Who have you been? And who are you becoming?
I mentioned my kids. I'm a father first, no longer married to their mother, which was a tough thing to go through. But upon examination of all that, if I had never been married or never get married again, that is something I can live with. Had I never become a father, that would have been a tragedy for me. Certainly my biggest role, my biggest mission as a human, given this one linear life in this realm. I really cherish and value that role, and my relationship with my kids, both very, very good people. So beyond that, then, which I think is maybe more the pointed question here, is I am a storyteller, which can be kind of a buzzword these days, but it encompasses more of what I do, what I aspire to, what I am, the legacy and the lineage that I will leave behind, which is to say, I'm a filmmaker, a producer, director. I have edited, I have written, I have been a cinematographer. I have been a performer, a singer in bands and choirs. I have been an artist. I have created both still and motion media projects. So would the term be creator? Perhaps so. But for me, it's story. I'm a storyteller, right? Capturing and passing along what I have seen or what people have told me to others who may find it educational, informative, or inspiring.
I also view you as a truth seeker.
Cool. I appreciate that observation. I value truth highly, and not just because of some sort of Boy Scout mentality, or yes, I was in the military. I went through military school, the Air Force Academy, where there's an honor code, and there's some notion of truth, justice, and the American way, and always doing right, and blah blah blah. But we all struggle with our truth of who we are, or what is our truth as far as perspective on the world, our values, and whatnot. And then there's somewhat more objective truth: what happened, why, and it's important that people know, right? So in that sense, yeah, I find truth the easiest way to live, right? You don't have to remember what sort of alternate version of the story you were spinning and to whom you told that story. Truth solves so much of the stress of life, whether you got to fess up that you did something that wasn't entirely in the agenda originally or how you had planned, or that may have let people down, or that you have an opinion, or you have a worldview that's how you see it. And, people got to know, love me or leave me. That is my truth. So yeah, seek truth, tell it. Truth makes the world a better place. That sounds cliche, but I think it's true.
Well, isn't that a core tension of what's happening today? And not only do I view you as a truth seeker, but I view you as a truth guardian. I look at what's happening in film, the arts, where technology is making things negotiable that previously weren't, that AI can fabricate history, deepfakes can rewrite memory, consolidating small voices and erasing them. So I'm quite curious from your experience and your personal perspective, two things. Do words matter more than pictures? And then second, I would like to know from you about this core tension that I'm experiencing today.
Yeah. Okay. Boy, there's a lot in there.
Yeah.
Do pictures matter more than words? I'm going to translate that and say, do emotions matter more than words? And yes, absolutely. There's the old adage that a picture it speaks 1,000 words. I think I'm butchering that. That doesn't sound right, but something along those lines. The notion that when you can immerse someone in the story or the truth or whatever it is you're trying to communicate, using spoken language seems grossly and woefully inadequate.
Yes.
Toward creating the feeling, whether that feeling is positive, negative, immersive, trying to capture. It's why I pause here. I'm trying to find the right words to put into language what, when you ask the question, floods my brain and my body with emotion around it. So, yes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. That was what I was trying to come up with my podcast brain, right? And the second part of that question was, and forgive me if I'm misspeaking, but I think you were asking about truth in form of the craft and the art of storytelling and the visual arts, right? So this is a great film school type discussion, one that I had when I was in my grad film and television program up at Syracuse years ago, with a wonderful mentor and professor in his class. He cherished the academia and the academy, right? The discussions that were held in class, much more than just the material being passed along. Wonderful guy, wonderful conversations held there. And it was about truth. Is documentary truth? Is journalism truth? Where do we draw the lines? Reality television, then scripted and fictional stuff. Can there be more truth in fiction than sometimes even journalism, right? Depending on the intent. But we were specifically talking about documentary, which is the art form probably in which I am most experienced and make the majority of my living doing. And the conversation went something like this. So, there is journalism where truth is absolute, right? You are supposed to present the absolute truth. You do not edit up a photograph. You do not edit a soundbite other than to shorten it or remove things that might, hinder the language, but you do not change the context. Whereas in documentary, particularly because documentary is information, but also entertainment. In a documentary, it is not. There are journalistic documentaries, but then there are more cinematic or storytelling, immersive storytelling documentaries, and we see them all over now. The 4-part Netflix documentary series, particularly true crime, they pervade. Right, documentary as an art form is much more present than it ever was. It is no longer requited to the small rooms of PBS viewers and the rooms of National Public Radio listeners. Right, this is a very mainstream craft now and consumable. But so when a documentarian enters an environment with a camera, even if it's a one-man band, one-woman band, one-person operator with a camera telling the whole story by themselves, you alter that environment. And so truth still present in that environment. Now, I know where we're going, and the question you're asking is much more technologically driven and or revolving around the zeitgeist of political influences or what I'm trying to accomplish. And so truth becomes much more muddied in that way. But can we perceive a deeper truth through those things? Maybe, yes, still. My favorite comment on truth that I often go to when asked a similar question to this is Stephen Colbert on his show.
Nice.
He used to have a word of the day. I think this was back in his Comedy Central show days before he got on the show on CBS, which has subsequently, I think it's still going to be canceled this year in the tumult of political, in the political tumult that is our current national state. I think I've said that effectively without getting myself shipped off to some foreign.
You're free.
Good. So Stephen Colbert's word of the day on one show was truthiness. And I loved that because pure truth is a really tough prospect. Truthiness meaning an attempt at truth or playing in the realm of truth given certain effects or influences. I don't know what his exact definition was. I merely remember the word truthiness, which is in one way entertaining and makes me laugh a bit. And in another, I thought it applied to the art of documentary filmmaking as well, because we enter into an environment with a crew, either one person, 3 people, a producer, director, a camera, and an audio operator, or maybe there are multiple crews. You've got a producer and a director and a production assistant, however many people it may be. You are now altering that environment. I go into your home to make the Miles Levin documentary, and in asking you about your place and your time and all of that, I have now altered your truth. It is no longer the thing that existed before I got there. It is now, are you more performative? Have you come up with things you're going to say in response to my questions? Heck, am I sitting here on the pod right now being the truth of who I was an hour beforehand? Or am I trying to find pieces of myself and my thoughts and my life to present? So truthiness in the arts, in the way we present, in traditional art, fine art, the paintings on the wall, they are not the truth. They are a representation thereof, and thus perhaps they are truthiness. So to this notion of truth, truth in presentation of the visual arts as it pertains to modern technology. And so I think we're getting at AI, deep fakes, generative AI, video, photography, which is all derivative of things that have been created before. I don't yet think that the generative AI models, at least that are available commercially or for free for sure to us as creators, are yet capable of independently making stuff that is not derivative, that is original in thought and form. I think technologically enhanced intelligence, which I think might be a more apt term for AI or artificial intelligence. Some are calling it augmented intelligence. I could go down a rabbit hole here if you want to talk about how I don't think AI is going to be robots taking over. I think AI is going to be something that is infused within our, if we want to call them organic bodies, to make us smarter, faster, better, stronger. And that as I forget his name, but the futurist predicted in 19 years, we were going to reach a singularity 19 years from now, which the way things tend to go probably will be faster.
It feels faster.
The singularity being when intelligence between technology and humans is so melded together that there is no difference. And now the humans as we know it, or life as it has evolved on Earth, is at the next thing, which will be a million times more intelligent, more intelligent life. And we will be the dogs, the pets to them. Who knows if we are not advancing along, right? So, how has that altered the visual information, the visual content space? At this point, AI is certainly taking jobs from people who are creators, graphic artists, animators, some voiceover artists. You can do voiceover with AI. I have toyed with that, doing temporary voiceover for a piece before I would then go track with a human, just to get a different voice than my own or my editor's, because we hate hearing our own voices as we edit and before going final or lock to go to air or to deliver to a company or whatever it might be. But there's nothing like human creativity at this point. It's obvious to my children when something's AI more so than it is to me. Certainly when it comes across the Instagram or other social media platforms or interfaces on the web. But I think we value the truth. I think we value the genuineness, the authenticity of human creation as humans who exist as we know ourselves now, enough that we are fighting the notions internally against the lack of, or the perceived notion of this being generative from truth and not truth itself.
Jim, I want to stay on the topic of truth just a moment longer, and I want to anchor it just a touch differently and then circle back around if I may. Getting into your background a little bit more with the military, the first combat camera squadron existed to be the Eyes of Command. Is that correct?
I think Eyes of the Eagle was often our mantra or motto.
So therein, you're capturing imagery for the president, the secretary of defense, the chain of command, the full Monty. You're documenting this. So what happens when the official eye develops its own consciousness? What does documentation become? Does it become testimony, or does it become one person's point of view? And I think this speaks to truth and truism in capturing the moments of historical importance that lean into truth.
Are you saying the eye of the observer in those leadership positions, or the
Yes.
eye and the observer of the photographer?
The photographer,
Yeah.
the storyteller, the one creating the content.
Right. Like so they're editorializing, right? They're deciding what to shoot, and then there are going to be levels of editorializing, or say editing, right? Bringing the full concept of truth, as could be captured, into representative pieces thereof that hopefully convey the truth of the situation that's being documented. Much like any photographer, your combat or war photographer or military photographer, if we're not engaged in active combat at that time, being put on exercises or other events. They're picking and choosing. They can't record everything. There's no 360 camera that captures every moment, every smell, every sound.
Sure.
So, hey, here's a great. The event is going on. I need to capture a big old wide shot so you can get the scope of it. Then I'm going to find details and people's faces and hands that convey what's going on here. We're rolling out a new piece of equipment. Let's make sure we capture that technological aspect of this thing. And then let's weave it into a narrative story, whether that's still media, still photography, motion media, the lone wolf photographer or the team sport video production crew. Although we often in the military now do that with just one person on either side of that divide, or both. We send them out now with one camera. They shoot video, they shoot photos, which is very, very common these days in the news biz and in any other forms, documentary outlets, shrinking budgets, etc. So what is the truth out there? Well, there's the truth that happened as it is observable, the tree that falls in the woods. Now, if someone is there to capture it on film, digital film, on the sensor, to be able to relay the ones and zeros, the pixels back to those who might want to see it or who might be making decisions, who might be more informed by what they see versus just verbal or written reports. There's a little bit more of the truth that comes through, right? What is truth? If truth is, if truth is the thing that exists on the other side of the Netflix stream, the truth that is conveyed back to decision makers at the Pentagon through, say, a combat camera photographer's lens is probably the slightly down-resed version with digital hits that often comes through whatever bandwidth is available to the viewer in his or her home, in their home. So, truth is selective, and the first line of selectivity is that person on the ground with the camera trying to capture it and bring it home for whatever reasons. And it bears saying that not every photograph, not every video file and video clip or then production that is created by my former colleagues and former troops in combat camera comes home to be viewed by the President of the United States. In fact, that is very much the rarity. Sometimes it might be viewed by a colonel who's trying to figure out what the wing or the battalion might do going forward, or what went right or what went wrong. And sometimes those images go straight through all of that and they land in the archive. And they are for posterity. And in 50 years, whatever the equivalent of the History Channel is then, digs them out of the government archives and makes a great documentary about the invasion of Europe during World War II, right? That sort of analogous thing. So we can't capture all of the truth, but hopefully we capture enough of it that when it comes through the pipe and the editors and the selectors, that we get the picture of what truth might be.
Nice. To that end, 18 years with combat camera. You've had 5 deployments: Haiti, Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, if I have that correct. What did you learn about the truth in war zone, and how did that shape the stories that you're telling today?
So in the chaotic environment of whether it's peacekeeping mission or a war, say the invasion of Iraq, right, where we hadn't seen the full-scale invasion of another country in that way. Afghanistan started as, selective ops, special operations, small unit kinds of stuff, and slowly built. Even Vietnam started in a similar way, much larger groups of troops coming in, but nobody was invading. We hadn't invaded, maybe you'd say Korea, but certainly large scale since World War II, the invasion of the continent, to liberate Europe and to end the war, which took a year and a half to do. So when we were invading Iraq in 2003, nobody from the coalition, which was mainly American U.S. troops, but it was a coalition of several nations, is on the ground in the country. We're moving in to possess that land and bring the desired outcome to that place, right, which was the liberation of Iraq as it was postured at that time. Regime change ultimately being that goal, as communicated by President Bush in speeches prior to the invasion. So what I learned in that very planned, but obviously invading a country is not like planning a social or a wedding, right, where you can get almost all the details exactly right. There's a plan, but then the fog and friction of war just blows that all to hell, and you're trying to figure out how to go from there. So what I learned was do your best to anticipate, but be prepared that it is not going to go the way that things are planned. And certainly in this kind of environment, the not going as planned can be very catastrophic at times,
Sure.
but certainly dangerous for my own sake of it, people in my employ, people under my watch and direction, as the lead for Air Force Combat Camera Forces in that theater of operations. It's about 40 folks going forward into the country eventually. So that's what I would say. Push hard, make a plan, but be prepared for those left turns. And so as a producer in the film and television business, particularly in documentary, which can be uncontrolled action, much like our guys and gals and all of our teams out there in those uncontrolled environments. In the documentary business, not quite as uncontrolled, but certainly at times you get one shot at something, right? And I would find that was something hard to really convey sometimes to civilian crews who are used to having time to set up that in our military environment. It happens and it's gone. And so you learn to be present for the thing that will likely happen, to be prepared for it, but also to be prepared that there might be a left turn and that thing's not there. And how do I still capture that truth or that truthiness, that thing that is a representation of the truth of the scenario as best you can, to chronicle it and then pass that back so that the story is captured and told. And so I apply all of that, particularly the need to be well planned but flexible, to be tenacious about still capturing the things that we are either asked or tasked or that we decide we need to capture to bring home a story, or again that relative truth of the scenario, and how to deliver it. Just not to fall short. Right?
Yeah.
You got a mission here. Get it done. Finish up and deliver, so that you're not leaving people behind. You're not leaving opportunities behind. Button it up as best
Jim,
you can.
I want to ask some questions about the craft, this art, architecting great stories. You've transitioned from sports to social issues to forgotten histories. In your words, what's the common thread there?
In film school, we talk about finding the conflict, right? And when you and I met, we were working with a group of government and military storytellers, for lack of a better word. These were communicators who were communicating, trying to communicate in different and more creative ways to help, in this case, the Navy, make connections with their warfighters, their operators, contractors, right, to bridge those gaps. And I had an opportunity in that seminar that you and I were participating in and helping facilitate and mentor to talk about my philosophy on storytelling. And the big part of that, and certainly something you pick up from almost any film school 101 on storytelling or book on storytelling and film production, writing novels, all that sort of thing, is what's the conflict in the scenario, right? What are the stakes? Why do I care? Tell me why I care. Also, exposing the audience to good stories, good characters, who are the real reason that there are stories, right? Every story is about people, right?
Yes.
And if it's not about people, if it's about inanimate objects like cars or animals like penguins, we infuse them with human qualities, right? We get Morgan Freeman to do the voice of, the narrator, the voice of God for the Penguins movie a few years ago. I think it was Disney's documentary, right? And we just assign these human emotions to these animals, that help us relate to them as the viewer, as the audience, right? So compelling characters who are relatable, that connect to an audience, that invest them in the story, and then showing that audience the stakes. What's at stake? If you win, if you lose, why do I care, right? Why does the audience care? So these universal aspects of storytelling and themes, I think, pertain to sports, right? There's always a winner or a loser. There's always a human involved. There are backstories. I've made a good deal of my living for the past 15, 20 years, exposing people to athletes, coaches, fans of the sports world, and helping people connect to them, and thus investing people more in that sporting contest or that league or whatever it is, right? We love sports, don't we? We love a good game. Some people aren't into sports, but I think many of us are, and it's because the drama's baked in. There are good characters, and we care whether our team wins or loses. So sports has it baked in, and I'll probably continue to certainly be a fan and hopefully work within the sports TV and documentary and film world for whatever years I continue to be a storyteller in this life. I think social issues or capturing, the historical story, exposing maybe unknown stories is the same thing. We're always looking for who was involved, why, what drove them, how do we relate to them, and then why do I care? What are the stakes? What's the conflict? Why am I rooting for or against, or why maybe am I rooting for and against? Because those are the most complex characters, right? People who are flawed like us, who are good, but who have, character challenges that we all do. I think those are the most relatable characters. You're talking your Walter Whites from Breaking Bad.
Fantastic.
Maybe the original anti-hero of the modern serialized television show era, HBO, Tony Soprano, right?
Wow.
He's the good guy in the film, but he's also a murderer and a mobster and a philanderer.
Yes.
Don Draper from Mad Men. I am now watching Mad Men for the first time.
For the first time?
I'm through 6 of the 7 seasons, and
it's fantastic.
It's cyclical. There are no countries to invade like in Band of Brothers. There is no great war to be won. But man, what a character study in this guy, this main character, Donald Draper, and the influence he has over so many people in his orbit and in that very interesting landscape of 1960s advertising world in New York. And he's good and bad. And to some people he's good and some people he's bad. And he can be really bad and he can be amazingly charming and good at the same time.
And talented.
So,
yeah.
I think that is the big tie, the characters and the conflict, and weaving them through. It's going to be sports. It's going to be documentary. It's going to be social issues. It's going to be all of that, because why do we care?
Okay, so this is good stuff. All make me care. Why do I care? Applicable to consumer product goods, to new content, new innovation. Why would anyone care? There's enough of the same stuff in the world. How do we make it better? Gotcha.
Why do I care about Tide? Why do I care? Because it makes my clothes clean. It keeps my kids' soccer socks nice and white. That's why I care.
So to some degree, that gets us onto a topic of purpose, but I want to hold on purpose for one moment and ask one follow-up question. Your favorite production, when you think about your body of work, what was the one production that changed you and why?
The documentary on the Orangeburg Massacre, for sure.
Can you explain the massacre and what your documentary was about?
Yeah, 1968, Orangeburg, South Carolina. I live in Santa Barbara, but I happen to be coming to you from Charleston, South Carolina, which is where my old combat camera unit is, and many of my friends from having lived and worked here for more than 18 years. And I'm here for a military retirement ceremony to officiate. So I'm down for the week. So I lived here for many years, just up the road in Orangeburg, South Carolina, an hour up I-26. In 1968, student protesters at South Carolina State College, it is now South Carolina State University, and HBCU, an historically black college, HBCU, historically black colleges and universities, were the students there were protesting. And mind you, this is 4 years after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which essentially lays it out that segregation is no longer legal or accepted. But it takes a while across the South for all of the institutions, all of the businesses to be integrated. And generally this happens by protest groups coming and doing a sit-in, protesting outside of business, getting arrested, going to jail, but then media attention and national attention are given to that situation, and the city, the hospital, the lunch counter, or whatever it is now forced to integrate, even though they had been resistant to. And so that was the pattern throughout the South in the 1960s. So Orangeburg in 1968 still had, there was a bowling alley there. And it was the only bowling alley for a 100-mile radius. And the owner was an avowed anti-integration integrationist. Segregation was his mantra. He said, I have plenty of business. I need no other customers. Sign on the door said whites only. And the students thought, and certain students, organizers thought, that's not, that's no good. We want to bowl. So they organized a protest, went down there and stood outside wanting to come into the bowling alley. And this protest did not go in Orangeburg as well as others, and it got a little heated. There were some scuffles, and the students went back. And this was February of 1968. 68 was a year that was on fire in the United States. Ultimately, this you're talking Vietnam, the Tet Offensive had just gone underway. In 1968, you see the assassination of ultimately Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, as well. So there is, I think maybe even Malcolm X was that year. Forgive me if I don't have it pegged properly. So 68 was a year on fire in the United States. And so that may be one reason this Orangeburg situation wasn't quite as noticed by the country or national media. Also, it was somewhat swept under the rug. But over the course of several days, 3 and then a 4th day, starting on originally the 5th of February and culminating in the massacre on the 8th of February, 1968. The student protests got more and more rowdy, and the local law enforcement was not doing a very good job at handling it peacefully. And so tensions escalated and got to the point where the students were locked down on campus by, I think, the 7th of February, and the National Guard and the South Carolina State Troopers were brought in for additional security. And they had surrounded the campus to keep the students on campus. And on the 8th, tensions boiled over, and a group of the students that evening were protesting near the front of campus, near the front gate of the campus, where a line of all-white state troopers had been stationed, and they had started a bonfire out on the street as a way to make presence known. Fire trucks came in, and the state troopers kind of lined up on a hillside leading into campus. And at some point in the chaos, the group opened fire, and nobody is really sure if there was an order given or if it was fear or what it was. But in about 5 to 8 seconds worth of gunfire, 30 some students were injured and 3 were killed.
Oof.
And nobody's ever heard of it. That was the story I read in the New York Times about 5 years before. It was on the 45th anniversary. So it was 2013. And I have always, as I read stories wherever, I have a file where I just say, wow, that's a very interesting, impactful. I'm going to hang on to that. And so I filed away this story, and it was told in the sports section of the New York Times. And I would regularly peruse the sports section because I'm starting to work fairly heavily in sports television and documentary production. So I was always looking for stories to pitch. And I was soft pitching that for a few years. But that story, before I was able to get it made in right around the 50th anniversary, 2018, 2019. And I just thought, how could I never have heard of this? I lived an hour away in Charleston, South Carolina for many years. And this was around the same time as the Kent State Massacre.
Yeah.
And everybody knows Kent State. That's in the history books. How could these two very similar events not be logged into the consciousness of American history in similar ways? So it landed on my radar, and landed pretty hard in that sense of why. Why is this story not more known if it has all of these aspects of a story that we all should know? And so I wanted to at some point be able to tell that story, and I was able to because of a boss at the NFL Network who took the sports aspect of it that I was able to pitch. So the original story was in the sports section, and it was about the football team at South Carolina State College, the Bulldogs, the South Carolina State Bulldogs, and how members of the football team were involved in the protests. And actually, one of the three young men who were killed was a star running back, a freshman running back for the team.
Wow.
And as I got the opportunity to start working on the documentary, and I went to Orangeburg, and I, through some contacts, was able to meet some of the guys who had survived and were on the football team at that time, and so put the story together. It was an amazing story, not just of civil rights activism, that to illustrate how even peaceful protests, there is a lot on the line, particularly when you're dealing with the chaos of that situation, and the fact that not everybody was on board with the way society was changing, whether it was tacit or outward. It was still there, and we know it's still there today when you're talking about race in the United States, particularly police violence against people of color, which I have a lot of friends in the police force, and I am in no way anti-law enforcement or military for that matter, but it's hard to speak about the situation and not recognize that there aren't patterns there that have continued to exist unless we continue to address them, which we have as a nation over the past few years, which is good. But when I was talking with these gentlemen, they were so kind and so gracious as to share their stories. And I recognized that for the justice, so ultimately, none of the state troopers were ever held accountable, ever went to jail or faced. They were all examined. They went to trial, but they were all acquitted. There was a civil rights organizer who happened to live in the area, and he was back from doing time with SNCC and other organizations in Alabama and Mississippi. He had worked with Stokely Carmichael and Dr. Martin Luther King himself. It's a man by the name of Cleveland Sellers, Dr. Cleveland Sellers now. His son, Bakari Sellers, was on CNN quite a bit. He ran for Congress here in South Carolina several years ago. But Cleveland Sellers, who was one of the people shot in the Orangeburg massacre there, he survived. He ended up going to jail for, as the court said, inciting a riot.
Wow.
It was a bit of a, which he had not done. They wanted to hang something on someone, right? You can't have this thing go on without somebody being responsible. He didn't serve a full year's term. I think he was let out around 9 months. But that was the story that went down. It was, there was talk that students had weapons and they did not. And it was swept under the rug. The civil rights, particularly in that era, the later 60s, South Carolina was a much more, if you will, genteel place. The scenario, the situation in this state was that things didn't boil over. They were dealt with in a more even-handed fashion, but this was an anomaly. And so for that reason, certainly out of the governor's office and the media outlets, the story did not rise to the attention of national media because it was framed differently. And so there was a double injustice that the men who I am now friends with, who appeared in the documentary and who graciously shared their stories with me, they never had justice in this situation. And so what I found in being able to tell that story was that, and you know how I feel about the power of storytelling and the power of
Yes.
stories themselves, which I'm always happy to talk about. And I think I shared with you that little bit of preface or chapter 1 that I'm writing in my book about storytelling is the power of the story for them was that getting renewed attention to what had happened to them, to their college, to their colleagues, to their friends, and their community in Orangeburg, wasn't justice legally. It wasn't justice spiritually. It wasn't justice necessarily on the grander scale, but it helped elevate that situation. It let people know who maybe hadn't heard the story before. And in some way, that is its own flavor of a modicum of justice in this scenario, and maybe enough of a head nod to these gentlemen and a tip of the cap to say, you were wronged. And as a nation, as a human race, we owe it to say to you, this story matters, and we're gonna tell people
Nice.
that this happened. So I think that to me was
I appreciate that.
the reason, so much of the reason that it was important to me on a grander scale. And if I may share, so there was another, I think, more personal thing that I picked up from working on the film, and it came from an interview I did with one of the football players. Again, he was one of the gentlemen who had been shot. His name's Bobby Eady. May he rest in peace. He passed about 2 years ago. His son and another of our friends shared the news with me. Jackie Kennerly, who was dear friends with him, and another of the men who was shot, one of the football players who had been involved in the protest. But when I was sitting with Bobby in our interview talking about all of the events, the massacre and the football team, and the fact that the coach allowed these guys, even though they were his football team, his star football players, they had a great fall season in 1967. The Bulldogs. Bobby was a linebacker. Jackie Kennerly was one of the wide receivers. These guys had crushed it. in that fall. So the Bulldogs were on a high, and Ori Banks was the coach that year, and he recognized that this issue was larger than a football team and a record and sports itself. And so he allowed these guys to participate. Some of them were on scholarship, and they could have lost their scholarships if the coach said, "No, I don't want you doing this student organizing thing. I don't want the attention on the football team. I don't want you risking whatever it might be. Let the other students do that. You guys stay away from it." And he didn't. Ori himself, I interviewed him. He shared that with me. But Bobby and Jackie and Walt, who were the guys who were sharing their personal stories with me, gave me all of that. And it is that story, but there was a smaller piece of the narrative that hit me harder than anything else. As this white male filmmaker who has come into an environment where black men were faced by white men and suffered a tragedy that was then covered up and buried, and were as gracious as possible to me. Bobby helped educate me in an aspect of what it means to be black in America, a young black man in America, in a way that I never understood. And he helped me learn and appreciate the notion of white privilege and what it is. And I'll tell you what he shared with me in a moment. But just for context, before this conversation with Bobby, I had never really appreciated the notion of there existing a thing called white privilege. Now, I knew it existed, but I didn't think it applied to me. I didn't come from privilege. I didn't come from money, and everything I had ever accomplished was not handed to me. It was earned, hard scrabble. And so I didn't necessarily appreciate that term because I thought it was handed to the collective of white people and not respective of particular circumstance or upbringing and whatnot. So as I was talking to Bobby, I forget exactly what the segue into this conversation was, but he shared it as poignantly as possible. There was no anger toward me or others, but he was talking about the talk. And I don't know if you know what the talk is. It's the talk that every black father has to have with his black son about how to pretend himself in public, particularly with law enforcement. And that is, don't argue, comply, just do everything you're told. Because for a young black man, a traffic stop, the worst possible outcome of that interaction with law enforcement is that young man is killed. As he shared that with me, and I hadn't heard that before, I just hadn't, I think I've always been a very open-minded person. My mother taught me to respect everyone, all races. I've always had friends of all races, but I'd never gone deep enough with anyone to understand that aspect of what it meant to be black in America. And when Bobby told me the story of how he had to tell his son, even, you're talking 30, 40 years after the Orangeburg Massacre, right? The 1960s, this ancient history of racism and segregation and the struggle of young black men and women in the black community in America. He's still having the conversation with his son about, hey, do not be disrespectful, do not talk back, because this might result in you getting killed. And that's when I realized
The gravity.
I have white privilege, because I never, ever, I've talked back to multiple policemen who have pulled me over for speed, like clearly speeding, going faster than the speed limit, and probably not in the best tone. But I never considered the fact that by doing that I might lose my life in the process. And so, in addition to all the larger issues that were at stake in sharing these men's stories and these football players, these sports men's stories, and what they went through in 1968 and in their whole young lives and even their adult lives, I got to learn something from Bobby Eady that was very valuable and dialed me in, probably in a much more acute way than the larger story that I got to share ever would. And I will forever be appreciative of that point of view that he helped me recognize, because I think if I value myself as an advocate and ally for those whom I think are being mistreated or unfairly treated, that I need to recognize that very privilege I have as someone who, certainly in the current environment in the United States right now, does not have to worry about the worst possible outcome of me going out in public and driving my car down the street right now.
Yeah.
Because I am not the target of these operations, right? I wasn't back then, and other white men weren't back then, and we aren't now. So that's what I took away from that whole experience. And I take away that these men embraced me and have kept me in a small community of their peers, in a way that feels very inclusive.
I appreciate that. That old cliche, secrets kept or stories told, come to mind. It seems appropriate. Words do have meaning, and what you shared with us is quite impactful, and I can understand why that production, which I understand may be ongoing for a sequel or additional investment from a patron to tell it even on a larger scale, is of historical and current importance. Jim, we're at the top of the hour now. I would love to have you back on another podcast to lean into purpose and more specifically who you are becoming. We had a conversation before the recording, and there's some deep conversations to share with others that I think would resonate quite loudly. In hindsight of today's call, it's clear that storytelling is in your DNA. That your trials and tribulations have made you a master storyteller, and that storyteller, in my opinion, is the truth. And that's why I spent so much time on truism today. I appreciate the way in which you weave it through multiple different genres, always careful with the ethics and the values that are applied, and being certain that you're historically and personally correct to whatever that subject matter may be. I've always known you as a stand-up dude. And so I'm extremely grateful for your time. If someone would like to get in touch with you for a consulting project, a documentary, videographer work, and or a conversation, how would one go about doing that?
Probably a good way to be exposed to some of my work, who I am, and what I do myself, and also the collective of other creatives I work with. My company, True Blue Creative, we've got a website. If you know of this thing called the internet, it's groundbreaking, and There are some screens on there. We call them pages. You can view it there. That's www.truebluecreative.com. And on there, there's a link to there's phone number and email and such. So I'll just drive people that way rather than share all of the info in sequence. So truebluecreative.com. Take a look, and would love to work with anyone who's got a story they want to tell and tell it well.
Yeah, thank you. We'll include that in the show notes. There's corporations that we're doing some consulting with, very large groups that are trying to reinvent their importance and resonance within their community. They could use your help in telling that story. So I think there's a great value there. And I think there's some growth stage businesses that are starting to emerge in the consumer products industry where things are melting down that are going to need help telling their stories so it's lifted from community to community. So we're going to do what we can in our network to push you and your talents forward. But beyond that, you are a beacon of signal and clarity in a world that's becoming ever more disruptive and confusing to me. In my humble opinion, we need more Jim Fabios out there carrying the torch and telling stories and preserving the liberal arts. Very much appreciate you, and to friends, family, and cohorts, thank you for tuning in with us today. 2, 1, we're live. Friends, family, and cohorts, we don't chase guests. We find people doing the work, quietly reshaping the worlds of design, sport, warfare, movement, code, commerce, and community spirit. We're back for part 2 with Jim Fabio. I did that for theatrical effect, man. Did it work?
I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jim.
In a world. You got to add in a world.
In a world.
In a world.
In a world of Jim Fabio. Great session. We really dug into who you are, who you've been, but I don't feel that we really got into who you're becoming. And something that you left us with on our first conversation was purpose. Purpose in storytelling, purpose in our place in a community, purpose as in family, profession. So let's lean into that a little bit further and dial it up. Jim, let me ask the question, not to be cliche, but to kick off the convo. I know who you've been. I know what your resume looks like. Who's the man behind the camera becoming?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I think even without asking it on the nose like that, I certainly ponder on the regular. You mentioned purpose, which I suppose we talked about, in that last hour. Certainly, I'm grateful and I think lucky to have found that my talents helped me feed into what I would say is, I don't know that there is any granted purpose or, one course in life for anybody, but certainly telling stories has given me a purpose. And I think more so than for, if we're talking about on into the future, who am I becoming? I think I'm becoming someone who wants to answer those questions, and so that leads me to ask myself, why do you do this? Is it for to pay the rent, to pay the bills? Is it for accolades? Is it for adulation? And I'd be lying if I tried to say that I'm some sort of human who is immune to any of those things. Yes, the answer is yes. I have chosen a profession that does pay me. Thank goodness. I'm not a starving artist who's making films. I am a filmmaker who works on the regular. Am I always telling the story I want to tell? Not necessarily, because people often want to pay me to tell the stories they want me to tell. But I have had the opportunity over, say, 30 years of doing this to start to select the projects that do fulfill me. And what are those projects that fulfill me? And what is the why, at least professionally? There's a different why in Jim the human. They're closely related, but I'm happy to get into that as well, and maybe why the choices. But why do I tell stories? Why do I feel like that is the purpose that I've chosen for this one trip through linear time and space in our universe, my life as gift, the gift that is granted? from wherever it came and unto whence it goes. Yes, it is to tell stories, and yes, it is to make a living, and yes, I hope that people like what I say as a storyteller. I hope people are moved by it more than anything. It stirs emotion in them, that they are informed and educated, and maybe in the maybe in rare cases or in more cases they decide to make a change in their life, or at least a change in their perspective, to see the world a little differently, right? Because that is some of the purpose of why I am who I am. I want to be a student of our world and learn as much about it and change my perspective, learn, grow as a soul and as a human in this body with this brain. So,
So Jim, let me interrupt.
Along, yeah.
Let me ask this quick question. In our last episode, we talked about truth and you being a truth seeker and a truth agent. Are you now sharing you're like a change agent, that in this process of, okay.
Look, if that happens, that's great. I don't see myself as some, and I'm not discounting myself nor disqualifying myself from that categorization, but perhaps so. I would like, so this is what I was getting to with, purpose. Yes, as a storyteller, purpose, but honestly, you ever, you ever go backpacking or go out into nature and you'll see the signs on the trail, pack your stuff out, leave it better than you found it. Right?
Always.
That's what I'd like to do with my time here on Earth.
Well said.
Leave it just a little bit better than I found it. I don't want to mess it up more than it already was when I got here.
Man, that's profound. There are too few people that feel that way today.
If that, I will consider the entire experiment a success. If there were a way to measure it all, the scorecard came out that hey, the place was a little bit better than you found it, Jim.
Okay, sit on that for a moment, just for a second. That's a perspective and a mindset, right? There's a point of view, and that's very, it's reflective and it's projected as well. Leave it better than you found it. What happens to the individual in a circumstance where their sense of purpose is gone, whether it's career professional that's been displaced because of consolidation, a military operator that's now leaving the military to civilian is having a difficult time transitioning, an individual going through a divorce, financial duress, where you're at a moment in time where the truth that was may not continue to be what will continue, and purpose is brought into question. How do you leave a place better than it was when your presence is uncertain?
Well, I think in that moment in time, and hopefully it's a moment that isn't permanent for the individual. I'm speaking from personal experience as well. I think in that moment in time, maybe you're setting aside the notion of what's my purpose, and you're shifting into how do I survive this, depending on the severity of the impact of that circumstance. I've been through divorce. I retired from the military recently. Mind you, I have been a reservist for many years. I had been. And so I was living both sides of that professional coin, if you will, sometimes in uniform, sometimes deploying, sometimes working in the United States for the military, but then also continuing to work as the civilian filmmaker, producer, director, storyteller, a storyteller on both sides of that coin, right? A storyteller for the military, a leader of troops, and then a leader of crews on the outside, like a head storyteller. So that but I've gone through multiple times of losing a job, not getting hired back to a job, having to be moved on from a job that I felt gave me great purpose. So even in the professional sense, been divorced, gone through that. It was a particularly difficult scenario, even if in the long run, I think the both of us agreed it was probably better, and has been very positive and supportive, especially in the aspect of being co-parents and raising our children in separate households. But and I've also lost friends and colleagues who also had difficult time of losing their purpose. And you and I have talked about that somewhat, and that has had great impact on me as well. So, I remember when I was in undergrad at the Air Force Academy, mind you, and making a decision that maybe my future wasn't in flying jets and dropping bombs and all of that. Maybe it was in telling stories. And I wasn't sure of that yet. And there were circumstances that ultimately helped me decide that, and or, present circumstances where that path was going to naturally emerge. And I set some life goals, and I wrote them on a piece of paper. And ultimately, I had to consider purpose there as well. And as I got into my civilian career in the television and film industry, set goals like I want this and want this and want, I want to work on this, and then I want to do this and all that. And eventually I loosened up on that, and I understood that if I set these very specific goals and I don't achieve them, I'm going to feel like I have fallen short. I wonder if there is a way for me to set a goal that isn't necessarily circumstantial, but it is more overarching. And I decided, as long as I am telling good stories, and that's there's a lot of, you can explain what's a good story and all of that.
Right.
But fulfilling to me, has some impact on the world, possibly, again, changes minds, educates, informs, and influences, inspires, then I'm telling good stories. And if I'm telling good stories, does it matter if they are in this genre or that, or if I have gotten, a deal to make my first major motion picture, or if this is an institutional spot commercial for a university, or whatever it might be, at what level. If I'm telling good stories, and maybe telling good stories is being a good storyteller and taking and elevating a story that might not have had the same potential with a different storyteller, I am finding purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I am fulfilling the thing that I say, this is why I'm here, is to tell good stories. And so if I were, say, to encourage people who are trying to find that purpose, I might say, go broader. Don't be so myopic with your purpose. Like, my purpose is to be X, this specific thing. You might find that that's a very difficult purpose to achieve if you are more amorphous, or let's say esoteric, and I'm not sure if that's the right word, but if you are less pointed and specific about it being achievement oriented or checkbox type scenario, and more about what's the higher purpose, not necessarily anything religious or spiritual, but what's the overarching. So in the sense that if someone loses their purpose for a while, or their place, right? And I think what we're getting at somewhat is this conversation we've had before about when people get out of the military, particularly if they've been on specifically active duty for a long time. And I'm not saying that reservists who are in and out of uniform don't experience the same thing, especially when on longer stints of being called back to active duty, which I have had. I have witnessed friends, colleagues, and I have seen it in myself, and I had to prepare myself for my transition. And I did find that for about a year, which has been into the last, from 24 into 25, I had to deal with the absence of what had been a very circumstantially defined purpose, which was some sort of a higher purpose, right? With public service. If I serve in the military, I am doing that for country, for my fellow citizens, maybe for myself as well, but for the desire for that higher purpose, like a higher calling,
Yeah.
right? It's probably why people go into the clergy. I'm sure it's why people go into social work, or any of these sort of giving career fields. And I'm not saying that military is all about giving, and I'm not saying that every field, whether it's clergy or social work or medicine or law enforcement, there are external motivators there and some benefits that are given to people, but these are helpers. These are people who are there to help, protect, provide for society at large, not just for individual family, like some pursuits might be. And so when one loses that, for whatever reason, forced retirement, it's time to get out, or it's time to move on to something else, a decision, I think that can have a great impact. And I have seen plenty of former military folks struggle with that. And unfortunately, some very close to me not find that purpose. And the results are at best self-examination and a trying to find something else, and a wallowing, I would say. But there are also, particularly for those who've carried, let's just say from the military experiences itself, because I can speak firsthand to those, carrying trauma, say, which when you're wearing the uniform, you can justify by saying there is that higher purpose, that larger mission that I am involved in. So the things I carry in my brain or my body that have been difficult to bear are worth the price. But when you take off the uniform, it's a little tougher. It's tougher to fit into when you're not in that locker room anymore, like the NFL guys tend to have to prepare themselves for, or deal with that separation from the life they knew, right? That purpose of coming in day to day to hone the craft, to be better and better, so that on Sunday they're performing at peak, and hopefully that the whole team is, and they're moving on toward a championship, and bringing home the glory for a team and city and organization and teammates, really, which oftentimes is the most important thing for those involved in the group activities like that, and certainly military is one of them. So at best, an examination of what could be my purpose now. At worst, a succumbing to the hopelessness of not finding it, of carrying trauma and depression, and no longer being able to avoid the instinct of ending the pain, which at times is only achievable by ending the body and brain's life, which is the saddest way to lose purpose, or the saddest result of losing that purpose and that reason, that raison d'etre, the reason for being.
Yeah, Jim, purpose and stories. We spoke about this at length prior to our first recording. Self-awareness and self-care are key attributes, in my opinion, to having a purpose, understanding who you are in your current circumstance, who you've been, who you'd like to become, but also the here and the now, whether it's self-care, self-improvement, self-education, whatever it might be. As a master storyteller and one who has documented combat, pro sports, historical events, talk to us about both your personal experience and that as a filmmaker of self-awareness and self-care as it influences purpose in storytelling and in life.
So for the self-care aspects of my life now and finding, so I can't tell that story, if you will, without really delving into something I alluded to just a few minutes ago, which is I have carried some trauma myself throughout life, from childhood trauma, but also there's some military experiences that have exacerbated the things that I've carried, and then there were some circumstances over the past, let's say 5-10 years, 5 to 7 years, that have brought those things to bear, and pushed me to a place I thought I'd never be. For what I would in no inconsequential way say, my own preservation, I have had to find ways through, particularly carrying the weight as a former leader and commander of combat camera troops who weren't able to themselves find the way through. Some of whom I feel like on my part may have been, I missed signals and then carrying not an entire level of responsibility, but certainly the weight of, hey buddy, you missed that one. You should have picked up on those signals. And so that responsibility that is largely self-imposed, because I'm no longer in that position of being to the direct leader or commander of most of the folks that I was, or all of the folks now that I'm out of uniform. And certainly, but I was at the time a few years ago when there were a culmination of events that included several friends, former troops, some of whom I was very close to, succumbing to their own demons and taking their own lives because of trauma accrued during experiences downrange and through other parts of life. So, and dealing with my own trauma, mental health, physical health, and need for purpose and finding, even at times just survival, and a way to, and hoping that there was not only a way out or to survive, but how would I thrive from this, from divorce, from subsequent relationships falling apart, from losing troops to the trauma and the experiences, and that inability to make the transition from one locker room to the next, right? From wearing that uniform to whatever was going to come next. I decided, rather than succumb myself, that I would avail myself of every possible opportunity, every method that I could find, that I could try, experiment with, and to see what effect it had on my body, my brain, and the things that I was carrying that were at the time gaining the upper hand on me.
And
so, and what comes next?
Yeah, no. I know where this is heading.
And on part 3,
no, this is great. We're leaning into something that I think is going to be of great importance to many that are dealing with trauma, whether it's loss of purpose or just a situational distress. And what you had shared with me, I found very vulnerable, very truthful, very relevant to what's happening in society today, not just to the military, yes, to the military, but also to a broader audience. And I think hearing this from you with the success that you've had in your career and your profession humanizes a lot. And so I'm anxious for you to lean into that to whatever extent you're comfortable.
Yeah, I'll start off saying, so I was diagnosed with PTSD about 7 years ago. And my immediate response to that was, no, that's not what's going on with me. I was severely depressed, almost in an incapacitated way at the time. But I didn't like the notion that, well, this is PTSD. I know some of my guys have it. I know a lot of ground pounders in all the services really deal with some crazy stuff. They're getting blown up. They're seeing buddies next to them, bleed out in all of these situations. And I haven't necessarily experienced that level of severity to my military experiences. And so, and as a leader, I'm often sending my guys into those experiences. But, once I became more of a senior leader and not a junior officer, but that's not me. I don't deserve that moniker, if you will. And a psychiatrist said to me, well, you have all the symptoms. And so if symptoms indicate a condition, well, then you have this. And this wasn't even a military psychiatrist. This was so it was the first time my mind opened up to, okay, what's going on with me? Is this difficult time I'm having, feeling this lack of worth, feeling this lack of purpose, having trouble working, telling the stories that I so want to tell, and I take pride in and want to deliver on, that pay my bills, but also, hopefully elevate the art form of my storytelling. And this was during the period of time when I was in a very rough place, in the middle of my divorce, and both emotionally and financially and such, career wise as well, trying to keep that all together, as a father, trying to figure out what the landscape of that was post marriage, my eye was on survival, and not necessarily at that time finding a way to thrive, and turned out survived. Maybe at the time, the most I was able to muster up was a medical response and trying to find pharmaceuticals that might help me through depression, and nothing seemed to work. The medications are so hit or miss, and really throwing spaghetti against the wall to see if it sticks. But I got through that, and then like as life is wont to deliver, it's cyclical. There are ups and there are downs. I do value living a life that isn't linear and has some cycles and some different experiences. I was noticing they were getting more and more difficult to deal with. And I really had to, through therapy, at first talk therapy, start to look at the causes of why I was struggling. And that opened up a whole can of worms into some things I had never heard of, 50 years old nearly at that time. And I knew I had a really shitty childhood. I acknowledge that. But I thought that was something one would escape. I thought I had escaped it. I thought when I left for college, for military school, and went on to this, if you will, higher purpose of serving in the military, and at the time wanting to be a jet pilot, that I had survived that, and that no longer was a problem for me. Well, learn through different modalities of therapy, not just talk therapy, EMDR, if you've heard of that, digging in with the help of professionals who've done this for a while. I really started to uncover why I referred to my childhood as really shitty, and a significant amount of childhood trauma, which I think is a very emerging thing, and a lot of people understand and acknowledge these days. I didn't understand the effects of accrued trauma on the body, on the mind. Throughout the early stages of and through all my life, all my adult life, I realized that, I had a very keyed up nervous system. I interpreted things that were not existential threats as though they were. Nervous system responses being trigger, hair trigger nervous system responses, the result of an overly keyed up nervous system. Was always on hyper aware. And so once I'm in the military and once I'm, in some training opportunities and survival school, and then off to deployments with combat camera and being downrange and leading troops and worrying about their safety in some of these environments and carrying the responsibility of putting them there. I realized all of that stuff is building on top of this other stuff that I'm already carrying. And so when I find myself later in life struggling in circumstances, personal life, professional life, I'm able to look back and see, oh, this isn't a new thing. This is something that's been going on. And it's something that's been impacting the people I love and that are closest to me. It was probably a major contributing factor to the dissolution of my marriage. It is something I had to make sure that I unwound and was not imparting to and imprinting on my children, which hopefully I have, since that is my highest purpose, if you will, being a father. I have worked very hard to make sure that those channels are open and that understood, right? Because I feel like knowledge is power. So if my children understand me and that history in dealing with those struggles, that they will be more prepared and not internalize and bury the things that perhaps they felt from or seen in me.
Jim, yeah, please.
Yeah, I think you're going to want to ask about, excuse me, the methodologies I've gotten into, and I know that's probably where your question started, but if you want to branch, I'll follow your lead.
You nailed it. I was going to ask about lessons learned, models deployed, therapies engaged, whatever is utilized that help you rebound, resurrect, and redeem from the darkness that you are working through, as it may help resonate with others in similar circumstances, or at least open up the perspective and conversation that they're having with themselves or with their physicians or whomever.
For sure. To get to a place where I was open to how to avail myself of opportunities, methodologies, mindset shifts, I had to, like many who, I would say like many men coming up in our society, and then particularly military members who coming from these environments where it wasn't necessarily okay to admit I have this mental issue that I'm dealing with. I have this psychological issue that I'm dealing with. I have the resultant physical issues that might be the result of these things, or the side effects of these things, carrying trauma in the body. That acknowledgement had to come to me personally first, and then eventually, you know what? I'm not keeping this thing to myself,
right?
Because it might help other people, particularly my former military colleagues, who I talk to on the regular, and I know multiples of whom are still struggling with this stuff. Excuse me, sorry.
Yeah, no, by all means. So, No, I
But
appreciate that you're staying connected with others and that you're opening the dialogue so it's not closed or sequestered behind the doors. Um, and I recognize that everyone experiences things differently. It's remarkable. I've had a couple operators on special community, and I've asked them how much of the PTSD that they're experiencing was combat related versus childhood related, collectively. And this isn't specific; it's a collective, a plural. That it's been childhood related. Many of these reflections have come through organic therapies that are legalized and some of which are experimental, but most are legalized, that are helping them to open their mind and their horizon and bringing things to the forefront that maybe their conscious mind was not as acutely aware of. And I think this all leans into the stories that we're telling others, stories we're telling ourselves. So let me hit a pause because I know you were getting ready to lean into that. I was just trying to help cue it up, my brother.
nice. Okay, so when I was in some dark days, I felt like I had a choice. Um, and I wasn't alone, but I felt alone. And I think a lot of us had to examine one of our colleagues who had he was a poster child of combat camera. He was the kind of guy where when we needed to send a photographer downrange to work with special operators, say, he was one of the very few who were sharp enough, had the temperament for it, the training, physically fit, and talented enough to capture the things he needed to capture with his camera and tell that story within that community that he was sent. A lot of respect for this guy. I had the privilege of being a team leader for him a little later in career after a lot of these experiences. This was during Iraq, Afghanistan. It was 2009 when I got to work with him, and he had been on some of these deployments in the past. Sharp guy, great sense of humor. We got close. He ended up getting his commission. So he went from being an enlisted photographer to an intelligence officer. And I think at the time he after a bit in that intelligence community, he realized this is not. I don't like this. Doesn't have the community that I had. Doesn't have that locker room I had. And he decided to get out. And we happened to be geographically co-located. I live in Santa Barbara, California, and his last duty station was Vandenberg Air Force Base, now Space Force Base, out not too far from me. So we got to spend some time before he ended his career and moved on to what seemed like maybe a more promising future besides being the intelligence officer that wasn't as fulfilling to him as his days in combat camera and being in our community there. And I think as a shocker to many in our community, the guy who we thought was impervious to all of these difficulties from downrange or wherever maybe he was carrying it, and some physiological stuff, from being downrange as well. He got to a point. We got a call. He had taken his own life, and it was during a time when there were about 3 others in rapid succession. And so, in a small community like Combat Camera, where really it's over the course of my 18 years at that unit and certainly 30 years of service, you're talking fewer than 1,000 people in Air Force Combat Camera. A couple hundred in any one era.
Wow.
And this is multiple decades. And so that many people in that short amount of time sent up signals, sent up signal flares that there's something going on here, something we need to pay attention to. It also triggered, I think, in a lot of us, a sense of vulnerability to it. Well, if and our friend's name is Jimmy Harper, And if it can happen to Jimmy, and it's happened to the others, it can happen to us, any one of us. And I think a lot of people were thinking, and some of us verbalized it, who's next?
Oof.
You know, it got that bad. It was like, who's next?
I'm sorry.
And so I right about that time, I was in another relationship, pretty serious relationship, and that one imploded as the that I didn't see coming, and so the 1-2 punch of that sent me into a spiral, and so I was back where I had been just 3-4 years prior, and dealing with some of the same stuff, and it was worse this time, and I was low, and I didn't understand it, and I didn't understand the darkness and why it felt so permanent and hopeless. And it was just the pain that would not leave. It was a darkness that wouldn't go away, no matter what positive or happy things would come into my life, no matter what encouragements people would give, like think of your kids and all of that. All of those things just made it darker and worse because it wouldn't go away. The reason for it existing wasn't because I wasn't thinking of my kids or friends or family or whatnot. It was just that there was this darkness inhabiting all the spaces of brain and body, and not abating in any way. And during that time, I had glimpses of this before, but during that time, I 100% understood why friends like Jimmy and others who had taken their life, and several who did after that point, I understood it. I understood why, and I wasn't mad at them. And I would observe people get mad at loved ones who would commit suicide as if they had done something offensive to the living.
Okay.
By taking their own life. And I'm sure you've seen that. You see people get upset. That was selfish of them. I heard people say that. It's very selfish of that person to do that. Do they not understand the effect it has on their children left behind? The individual who was saying it was selfish, like, I'm aggrieved because this person took their own life. I 100% understood that was not the truth of the situation at all at this point, because I was able to understand that I'm happy actually for that person, because if there is something after this life, they have gotten to move on to it. And it can't possibly have the level of pain that they were bearing in this life.
Yeah.
Taking one's own life is one of the most difficult things anyone could ever do. It is no fun to stare at that as a possible solution. But when it actually presents itself as, if things get to the point and nothing else works, then that is certainly a way to stop the pain that is going on inside me. And looking at that and having had the experience of losing friends and colleagues, family members as well, at previous times, I decided, Miles, that I would try everything else first.
Nice. That's the fighter in you.
Kids,
you're fighting.
Not for my kids, not for anybody else, but because I felt like I had some more runway in this experience, in this life, in this body and in this brain that my soul and spirit occupy for now. Like, let's see if we can keep this going for a while. And so that sent me on a journey of trying as much as I could to find ways to survive, but then maybe even a way forward once I started to gain ground on the thing. And so since late 2022, early 2023, I have not only learned a lot about myself and the roots of all of this stuff that had been weighing me down, the stuff that had been affecting me and my relationships, both personal and professional, throughout my life, familial. I tried to use every resource at my disposal, from health insurance to my own funds, to veterans and government agency nonprofits who were looking out for guys like myself or others who had been through some experiences, on behest of the nation, at the behest of the nation. And so I went to therapy, saw a psychiatrist. I tried out pharmaceuticals, too many, to varying degrees of effect, some which had the exact opposite effect for which they were being marketed. Those were mostly the antidepressant drugs, some of which were helpful, like beta blockers for nervous system regulation. And then subsequently, some very effective pharmaceuticals that were designed for maladies that I hadn't really even considered that I might possibly be challenged by or carrying. So I discovered that my depression wasn't unipolar depression, as the professionals might call it, that it was on the bipolar spectrum, and that despite not exhibiting symptoms of mania ever in my life, which is characteristic of bipolar, particularly bipolar 1, that there were lesser forms and a thing called hypomania. And there was a bipolar 2, and then even an unofficial thing called bipolar 3, or officially cyclothymia. I'd never heard of that. That was a friend said, "I wonder if this is you," and sent me some background on that. And boy, if it didn't sound exact. I even ran that by my ex-wife during that time, and I said, "Does this sound like something I've been going through for a while? You said when we split up that I didn't even recognize the things that I was challenged by, for the 17 years we were married, that you saw over and over and had to deal with in living with me." And sure enough, she confirmed it. And so that all congealed in a path where I was able to get on a medication that specifically is designed for mood control and dealing with bipolar. And that pharmaceutical, I will not hesitate to say, has saved my life. I take it to this day. But it is only one part of what I would say is a whole tool belt of methodologies, opportunities, substances that chemicals that have I have tried to see if they have efficacy for me, and that some of which I still prescribe to. So despite, other than pharmaceuticals, certainly I've always been a fairly fit person. I had never really been immersed in yoga before. Started exploring that. Now I'll do yoga for the rest of my life. I go to hot yoga 2 to 3 times a week. Vinyasa flow. It's a tough workout, but it's also amazingly cathartic. Oh. I found that along with the flexibility of yoga and the strength of the flow and yoga classes that I take, and they're very challenging, that the release within the body, for the first couple of months I did yoga, I would get very emotional in the midst of some of the the more cool down and stretching poses that we would do near the end of class. Particularly when I was doing flexion to get hip mobility, I was weeping in some of these poses. Nobody could see because I was leaning over on my arm.
Sure.
But the release that was coming, and later, I hadn't yet read the book, but I had talked with a friend about a book called The Body Keeps the Score, about how trauma is stored in the body and particularly in the hips. And then, that added up for me. Wow, I've been really releasing my hip area, and I've always had tight hip flexors and whatnot. And in the yoga, I was heavily releasing. And so I don't cry in yoga anymore. I didn't for all that long, but I sure did at that point. It was an amazing release. It had nothing to do with substances or pharmaceuticals. It had everything to do with mindfulness, strength, and a focus on flexibility and the body itself, right? That body's ability to be healed with the right approach. Hot yoga, of course, hitting the gym and strength training, which is now a regular part of my routine. I'd never really been a gym rat or a muscle head or any of that. Still not. But I've past few years of getting more involved in pushing my body in ways that I hadn't before. I realized I was able to develop strength to support the flexibility, which results in, honestly, better mental health, a more positive state, and I think a better self-image, which not only reflects physically, but mentally, maybe even spiritually. Been doing sound baths.
Really?
Sound therapy. Yeah.
What is that?
Yoga studio owner. Well, you get in a room and there's some ancient Tibetan style bowls, music bowls and gongs and all of that. And to be honest, of all the methodologies I've been involved in, and that includes like psychedelics, notably for me, it was ketamine therapy, which I'm happy to talk a little more about. All this therapy, talk therapy, pharmaceuticals, doing the yoga, physical fitness, breath work as well, doing the breath work, all of which had varying levels of help and efficacy, and have poured into, tools that are in my, my tool belt of self-care and wellness and thoughtfulness, arrows in the quiver, if you will, of how I approach and take care of, maybe even attack my challenges in life and my brain and body. But sound baths, very much the sound waves and the music in its own right, in its own way, that come from those instruments and the way they are played as we lay with our eyes covered and in stillness. You can feel the sound waves and the waves of music rolling through my body, as if it is being cleansed.
Sure. Sound frequency. There's a lot written about that.
Frequency therapy at the cellular level.
Yeah.
I've never experienced anything quite so impactful to my physiology, and thus that feeding into the psychology of the brain and body connection.
Jim, we're coming to the top of the hour, and I want to pivot for a moment and use the rest of our time to talk about spirit. We've talked about the mind. We've talked about the body. You brought up the spirit and the word ketamine. And for me, ketamine and spirit are interrelated, and they're intercosmos. I've not done it. I've got a dear friend, a physician, board certified pain management anesthesiologist that administers it for both PTSD and pain management. So I've had some deep conversations with him about altered consciousness, one's place within the universe, the cosmos, and within themselves. Can you talk a moment about your experience with ketamine, why it was beneficial for your condition? And we're not recommending this, that people go out and try it recreationally or anything like that, but specifically to what it did toward uniting your mind, body, and spirit and overcoming some of the challenges that you've so graciously shared with us today.
Yeah. So ketamine is a 100% legal, made in a laboratory. It's a drug often used as in emergency rooms, medical scenarios to relax and to calm patients. It's an anesthetic of sorts. I'm not a medical professional, so if my description thereof is not 100% accurate, I will defer to all the nurses and doctors who are friends of mine to correct the record after they make fun of me. So that's my disclaimer on ketamine. There are other there are other psychedelics. I would say ketamine, if you're using it in this context, would fall into the category of psychedelics. And the psychedelics would include everything from LSD, which is also made in the lab environment, to natural plant-based ones like psilocybin, ashwagandha, ibogaine, and then it's escaping me now. The one you have to go down to like Peru or Central America to take. That's
ashwagandha.
That's not ashwagandha. That's oh goodness, it'll come to me. But we'll get back to that. Aaron Rodgers, most notably of the NFL, went down and had that. And I saw. There's reports. 60 Minutes did, I think, a report on veterans going down and doing these treatments in Mexico and South America. But I digress. I had the opportunity through a veterans nonprofit foundation to receive ketamine therapy, a week's worth, 4 treatments, and the opportunity to explore that. I had no idea what I was in for. I did a little reading. I had a friend who had been experimenting through ketamine clinics for his depression and anxiety and trauma, and to many positive results. So I was looking forward to this, and it ended up delivering with much more positivity than I thought it might even provide before I started. And I'm not much of a journaler, but I kept a journal so that I would remember what I had been through. And I will say this in a nutshell, that I was probably getting to about the lowest of the lows that I had experienced during that 2022-23 period, about 8 months of just the pain and the darkness and the relentlessness of it getting worse and worse. The allowing the idea of how to stop the pain to enter the conversation in my head. And I flew to Chicago to go to a clinic there that this group was providing. And from the first opportunity to go into the medical facility and have the anesthesiologist administer IV ketamine, and that experience being entered the bloodstream, I did it eye blind and with the AirPods in, listening to some very subtly atmospheric music to help me disappear from that environment around me. And I fell into a hole inside myself. They call it, taking the journey, as I think is quite common with other as I think is quite common with other psychedelics. And I started exploring the world inside myself. I assumed it was my own brain and my body, and I was walking around alone in this, it seemed like a construct of a black and white city. And I was wondering where everybody was, and I realized, oh, this is me. I've disappeared inside myself. It's time for self-examination. And it was quite a fascinating journey. The results of which were when an hour later I came to, and I found myself like a patient on anesthesia coming out. Even on that first day, I laughed so hard and deeply.
Wow.
Coming out of that, because my body felt hopeful and relaxed and was not carrying the physical symptoms of what I had been carrying an hour before going into that
Remarkable
situation. There was a hopefulness that existed where there wasn't before, because I saw the promise of I am not stuck in how I had been thinking and feeling prior to. I had an outlook on my future that was one that said, these are the things I'm going to do. I wasn't seeing for the next day and just trying to get to bed that night and fall asleep and hopefully not be dealing with what I was dealing with. Could I make it through the day and just make it to bed, and there would be no more worries if I could just get to sleep. Because along with that depression and those cycles came insomnia and a needing to use pretty heavy pharmaceuticals to try to just sleep and get rest to maintain that modicum of a clear, as much of a modicum of a clear mind as I was able to. I did 4 days of that ketamine, going under, disappearing inside myself, exploring, taking that journey. And the things I took away from it, I've later found that are very common to psychedelic experiences. One is that all things are connected and that we are all part of an interconnected ecosystem. That is not, that we are not individuals, and everything is a part of that connected system. And I don't think that's groundbreaking, but to feel it and experience it inside myself, for me, was groundbreaking. Right?
Yes.
I'm not the first person to have that observation. And the second was, and this may sound a little hippie, woo-woo California, and I do live there, so maybe I have succumbed to its influence. But it was that the most important thing in life is love. And in this experience, as a human, with a soul or a spirit riding in this body and this brain, taking it for a ride for as long as possible, in this realm of linear time and space that we currently exist, whether we go on to something else or came from something else or not, that love is the most important. And I don't mean love in the romantic sense necessarily only. I mean love for one's fellow man, for a family, brother, sister, mother, father, children, for one's community. And I think that translates to a care and a kindness and a concern for those around us. The world's a tough place. There are bad things. There are bad people and events. But maybe if there's a little bit more of that, that kind of love that the human or the English language does not really have the words to describe fully or cover, maybe in a combination of other languages, we can, all the different kinds of love, concern, kindness, understanding, aid, support, community, and connection. I think connection being the most important. Then maybe there'd be a little less of the stuff we carry,
Sure.
and more of a shared burden amongst all of us, and an exploration of higher purpose, higher why, and maybe even a consideration of where we're going.
Wow, Jim, I am so grateful we did this second recording. You've brought it full circle. I'm taking away some fact bombs, kernels of truth here. For me, listening to you, it's about quieting one's cleverness. It's about widening the lens of possibilities of what may be or what could be, opposed to bringing in more rigid or contextual thinking. And when you talk about the word love as it might relate to connectivity, whether that's connection internal or external, it's quite powerful. And in the context of others that are going through darkness, what does this all mean and how's it applicable? I leave our conversation with the sense that movement is critical, whether it's frequency and sound or physical movement, that companionship, concerned companionship that is timed is important. The consistency of that, those touch points, but also the word grace comes to my mind, the gracefulness to allow you to evolve and adapt to those circumstances. There are many people suffering today, more so, both emotionally and physically, and wish nothing but the very best for them in their journeys. What you've shared with us about your experiences and your vulnerability is amazing. Hopefully it resonates loudly with others that are going through difficult times. And or have recovered and want to tell their stories, because I think stories, which is what got us together, are what tribes are made of. And when they're done well, they lift and celebrate. And when they're not done well, it creates a vacuum. And that vacuum creates emptiness, not darkness, but emptiness. And that emptiness lacks purpose, and the purpose then lacks continuity. I do want to say a few parting things, if I may. May all who mourn and all who remember Jimmy Harper be recognized. May his memory be a blessing to those now and in the future. And brother, you are loved as a brother from another in my house and in the larger community. The stories that you tell in sports, the community documentaries are remarkably strong. If anyone hasn't looked you up, they need to. And they need to watch some of your NFL films because they're beyond epic. But I wanted to use our time today to get to know you, the storyteller, the architect of content that has a humanness that many don't see behind the lens to a broader audience. So, my brother, for that regard, I'm grateful. And if our audience has learned or gained anything from this, I ask you to please take a moment and reach out to Jim through his website. In the show notes, post a comment on his social media, put a thumbs up on his work, because what he does is important in continuing that community. So with that, my brother, we send you a big salute, a big hug, and a high five. The world needs more of you.